Hello, my noble band of outlaws. Outlaw Samurai coming at you live with a video. Well, I'm a little under the weather right now, hence why I'm drinking this gigantic bowl of tea. I have an appointment tomorrow to get checked out. Right now I'm trying to sweat out the juices, so to speak. But earlier today I saw Shadiversity post a video called "I Spit on Your Sword." And there are a few points he makes that I, along with Matthew Jensen, would like to point out. The points I'm going to make are what he made, and my opinions, and some historical backing. First of all, one of the opinions he has of the katana is how everyone says you're supposed to display a katana this way versus this way. Now, historically, the Japanese tachi was displayed this way because of the fact that tachi are meant to be drawn edge down from horseback. You can tell I'm not super motivated at the moment. That's because I feel like shit, but decided to make a simple, non-excitable video to make a response. But the weird thing that Shad says about this is that it will not, that in his experience, storing a katana like this will not do what everyone says it does, and that means dull and damage the blade. Now, I can see where he's coming from this, and I can also see the validity in this claim, because if you look at swords from history, the military sabers of history, and even during World War II when the Japanese were using shingunto, the shingunto, which were basically katana with tachi fittings, were suspended from the hip with the edge facing down. More times than not. Not saying that some didn't just slip it through the belt and wear the sword edge up like tradition, but most were pointed edge down. Now, personally, this Scorn katana is fit so good, in my opinion, that I don't really need to worry about it being edge damaged. And the reason I still hold my swords like this with the edge facing up is more just tradition than anything else. I would store a blade like this with the edge facing up if it was just like, I don't really care, if it was just like for decoration. This does kind of look cooler, kind of like a edgelord kind of thing. And really, yeah, the edge slides on the saya when you draw the katana this way, but in retrospect, when you draw the katana upward and you push, when you're in a position like this, the spine is touching the back of the saya, but the edge is also, more times than not, even with perfectly fitted saya, rubbing up against the top edge of the saya anyways. So unless you are drawing the sword perfectly straight out every time, you run the risk of running the edge on top of the saya no matter what you do. So display like this or display like this doesn't really matter. It's mainly what Shad says, what's most commonly done, what's most commonly practiced. So, and with the Scorn katana in general, the saya, is so well fit to this blade that I really don't think that the edge of the sword, even when turned upside down like this, is even making contact with the inside of the saya, because, listen, no rattle whatsoever. Now, I don't really use this sword much. The major contributing reason is I don't want to mess up this beautiful Hamon pattern on the blade. So, this sword is the most least used out of all my swords, but still, no rattle whatsoever. So, saying that it will dull the blade, no matter how you draw the sword, no matter how you draw a katana, if you don't have perfect form every time, you're going to have the edge skid along the inside of the blade anyway, so it doesn't really matter in the long run. So, edge up or edge down really just comes down to honoring tradition, personal preference, and what someone personally thinks looks cooler. If you have your sword with this edged up, yeah, prepare to have a lot of jokes being made, or like, if you're me, and I go to your house and you see this, I'll be like, oh, you filthy, uncultured swine. You can see how under the weather I am. I don't even have the energy to make a good joke, and I'm sweating buckets. But yeah, I'll make jokes, but at the end of the day, like Shad said, this is you. This would be your sword in this example. You can do whatever the hell you want with it. I could display this sword edged up. Hell, I could even display the damn thing without the saya if I really wanted to. Why? Because at the end of the day, it's my sword. I paid for it. I bought it. It's my sword. So, there's that. Another thing that he makes is slamming the sword into the saya. Now, some Iaito schools actually, as far as I'm aware, make it a practice to do that. Like, as soon as you get down to the habaki, you, with a sudden quick movement, just ching, hear that satisfying click. And personally, I like hearing that. It's a satisfying sound, just a simple click. Historically speaking, who knows if this was a thing back in the Sengoku or Edo period, or the Taisho, or the whatever area of Japan you're talking about. But he said that one of the things that people were telling him in his videos is that that would damage the blade. I mean, not the blade, the saya. And yes and no. Yes, it will damage the saya, but no in the sense that if the saya is made with modern materials versus the traditional methods, then yes, because this is, at the end of the day, wood on metal. Wood on metal. And metal will always end up the victor. It's harder, it's stronger, and even if you have a koiguchi with buffalo horn around it, this applies to the same thing. Now, I said yes and no in the fact with yes, with modern materials, it will not, repeat, not damage it as much as traditional materials, because the traditional magnolia wood that sayas are made from, and the traditional lacquering that covers the saya are actually weaker than modern industrial lacquers, because traditional lacquers are made from natural materials. They are made from a natural process. And the synthetic lacquers that we have today that are on most sword scabbards are much stronger and more resilient to damage than their traditional counterparts. Now, this sword has a nice dark wood. I'm assuming it's some kind of hickory. I want to say it's hickory, because in North America we have hickory out the shit, so it's a very common hardwood to make sword handles, scabbards, even bows and arrows out of. Hickory shafts. And since it is a nice dark wood, it's some kind of hardwood. Now this is a very light saya. I like heavy sayas because at the end of the day, I view the saya as a weapon as well. But that's another thing. That's a more how do I fight thing. But yeah, doing this repetitively, you're kind of already doing that every time you unsheath and resheath the sword to begin with. So it's not necessarily that big of a deal. Now, if you're slamming this thing with all the might you can possibly put into it, that's another thing. But if you're just putting it in hard enough to get that clicking sound, then, again, not a big deal. Some schools even encourage that clicking sound at the end of the kata that you do for yaijutsu and all that shit. A third point that I wanted to bring up is when you stick the sword in the ground. Now, this is a bit of a controversial thing, especially to those who believe that katana are spiritual in nature. The Japanese believe that the katana is a gift from the gods. It is spiritual. It is a sacred object that must be treated with respect. And that's all well and good if you believe that. To me, this is a sword. It's a weapon. It's a tool. It's meant to kill someone else. It's meant to cut things. It's meant to be used for its intended purpose. Cutting and killing and basically defending oneself. And I've mentioned this before, but the Scorn Katana actually has a more historically accurate sized tsuba than all my other katana. Except for maybe the Ninjato, but that's more of a kokuto. In reality, it's a kokuto. But yeah, a single-edged kokuto. But sticking it in the ground, I don't really see the big deal in that because I don't really believe in the spiritual aspects of the katana. I believe it is a tool and a weapon. I believe it's up to the personal preference of the user to how to use it. And sometimes you'd have no choice but to stab the sword into the ground. Like you're heavily injured and you're trying to get away from a battle and save yourself. You'll use the sword as a cane and try to hobble away, or if you're losing your balance and you just need to catch yourself, just quick little stab into the dirt, pull it out, and you're back up and running. Now, Shad did mention that depending on the soil you're stabbing the blade into, you could cause some damage, like if it's really hard, rocky, or sand or grain-like soil, like in a desert or a very arid environment. I have a trash can beneath me, don't worry. A very arid environment, then yeah, you could cause damage to the blade and the edge. But at the end of the day, this thing is meant to keep you alive, so you can always get another sword. You can get another life. And I'll be touching on that in a moment after I finish this one. So just stabbing the blade into the ground, it's not a big deal, personally speaking, because I do that sometimes too, like when I'm just outside swinging my sword for shits and giggles. I have pretty much, Indiana has very clay-like soil, not a lot of rocks, and the soil in my backyard is completely covered in grass. So I'll just drop it into the ground, go set up a couple of targets, pull it out, wipe the tip off, and go to swing. And it doesn't dull or blunt my edge at all. I think I've stabbed the Warrior O katana. No, I've stabbed my crane katana so many times into the dirt it's not even funny. And it hasn't affected the edge at all. There's the satisfying click noise again. Of course, that has metal around the koiguchi. So, just stabbing this into the ground. Not a big deal. And believe it or not, sometimes that's the best way to clean your blades. Like my great-grandmother, when she used to go hunting, when you kill a male deer, there are these scent glands on the inside of the legs. They're called hocks. And if you don't cut those off, then the deer's meat will be spoiled and it will be completely gross to eat. And after you cut those hocks off, she would stab the knife into the dirt to clean it off. Then she would take a cloth, clean off the rest of the dirt, and then proceed to skin the deer. And then when they got it home, proceed to finish field dressing the deer, got it home, skinned it out, butchered it, and put it up. It's the same principle here. Even though she stabbed the knife into the ground, it didn't dull or anything. So, stabbing your blade into the ground, yes, can cause some minor damages, but it's so, like Shad said, it'd be so minute that you really wouldn't even notice it at all. In fact, I'd even venture to say, depending on the steel of your sword, if it's a traditional steel like a Brumery steel or a Crucible steel, maybe, but with a modern steel like this T10 blade, it wouldn't even dull it. It wouldn't even dull the edge a single micron, in my opinion. Another thing that Shad pointed out was the actual title of the video, spitting on the blade. We've all been there. We've all used our swords to cut saplings and shit, and the sap and stuff from those saplings get on the blade, and it gets mucky and everything, and we're outside and we don't have anything to get that sap off, so spit on it. So just spit on, rub your fingers on it, then take your shirt and wipe it, and it's relatively clean enough to put back into the scabbard until you can get home. And then I actually use baby wipes to clean that shit off my blades. Then I'll just dry it real good and put it in the scabbard. I don't even oil my swords, because traditionally speaking, you'd only really oil your swords when you're putting them up for long-term use. My swords get used so often that oiling them is just a waste of time. I'm either always swinging one sword, doing cutting sessions with another sword, or, like sometimes what Tempest does, I'll swing two swords at once just to fuck around in my backyard, basically. So, that's my own personal belief. You don't, and it was even proven by, I think Metatron or Shadiversity said that samurai from the Sengoku era actually didn't oil their blades much. They more along just wipe the blade clean and dry, and as long as you keep steel dry and clean, it won't rust. I mean, oiling it may preserve it for a little longer, but I personally would like a patina. I personally like patina to build up on my swords, which is a natural protectant. The next thing I want to point out, and this is a heated debate in a lot of sword circles, is what I've been doing this whole video. Putting my fingers on the sword. And yes, very high carbon steels will rust, and I have touched my swords an ungodly amount of times with my bare hands and rubbed my fingers all up and down the blade. And here's the funny thing, none of them have rusted. And here's why. My hands are clean. Depending on how dirty your hands are is a direct correlation to how the fingerprints will act on the sword. Now here's the thing. I'm sorry. My manager thinks I got apparently something's been going around Bloomington and stuff called a strip flu or some shit. And that's what one of my managers at work thought I had and sent me home. I'm making this video while I'm sweating profusely just to do something to kill my boredom. Now, here's the thing. When I said your hands, the cleanliness of your hands is directly related to it, I mean just that. If your hands are dirty, greasy, and oily, like you haven't washed your hands for a week, and then you go touching a sword with your filthy mitts, yes. But here's the thing. Modern steels is no pure steel anymore. And what I mean by pure steel is steel that is just iron and carbon for the most part. All modern steels are alloys. 1095 is an alloy. All the 10 series, they are alloys. They have other shit that's added to them, just not in the same abundance as like a T10. The T in T10 stands for tungsten. And tungsten is a metal that is highly corrosion resistant. Ergo, why T10 swords are favored by swordsmen. Because of T10's ability to hold a sharp edge for a very long time, but also its low maintenance. It's the same if I was to compare the Viking sword. This is 1055 steel, and just like T10, there are fingerprints all over this sword from me handling it and me touching it, but as you can see, there is no rust on the blade, and that is a very important thing to note. So when Shad says that rust would accumulate on steel, what I am assuming the steel that those helmets are made from are from the 10 series. They don't have any of the added metals or minerals that give corrosion resistance. Like in the case of 5160. 5160 spring steel, as far as I'm aware, has small amounts of chromium added to it. Again, don't directly quote me saying that. I'm not entirely sure, but I believe that it has small amounts of chromium added to it, which makes the sword very corrosion resistant, just as T10 has tungsten added to it. Now, I'm not saying that if you just touch a sword, that no sword will get fingerprints from touching it. Swords that don't have those higher amounts of corrosion-resistant minerals added to them will be more corrosion acceptable. And what I mean by that is, like 1095, 1060, the 10 series are very susceptible to rusting and corrosion because they don't have the tungsten or the chromium that is found in 5160 or 1095, not 1095, T10. Ugh. Oh, I'm sweating out the juices. You can tell how improvised this video was. So, on putting your fingerprints on the sword, I want to say that I have done it for so long that through my experience, I have debunked that. Now, I'm not saying that, like, you see how much I'm sweating, but I'm also wiping it off on my clothes. If I was to touch if I was to touch, say, the Warrior O with a sweaty fingerprint, then the salt and other oil, then the salt and such in my sweat would start to form rust after a couple of days. Like if I was just put a dab of salt water on the blade and let it sit there, yes, it would cause rust to build up and maybe even pitted, and maybe even a pit to form in the blade that I'd have to remove an ungodly amount of material from to correct. So, depending on how clean your hands are, is a direct correlation to how bad they will rust if fingerprints are put on them and this type of steel itself. And from off the top of my head, those are the only direct quotes that I remember from the videos that Chad made and the response that Matthew Jensen made. I may upload this over the course of the night, titled Shadiversity, I Spit on Your Sword, Response, Outlaw Samurai. But yeah, I just thought I'd make this video to kill my boredom for a little bit and give me something to do aside from just sleeping, drinking bowls of tea. Well, this could technically be considered my first bowl and a half. And like I said, just sleeping and watching YouTube and wallowing in my own self-misery. Well, I didn't think this would be as long as a video as it is, but then again, I have a hard time shutting up. So until next time, my noble band of outlaws, Outlaw Samurai tells all y'all, be crazy rednecks, be safe and use your weapons. I'm out. Peace. And I hope none of y'all get the shit that I got.